My Shimasani's hands, gnarled like ancient juniper roots, were the first to guide mine across the taut threads of the loom, tracing sacred patterns born from the heart of Dinebikeya. She called me Ayasha, little one, in our tongue, but the name carried a weight far beyond its diminutive sound. It held the echo of warriors who rode against impossible odds, of storytellers whose words wove the very fabric of our universe, of a people who have walked this sun-scorched, wind-swept land since the holy people, the Dine, taught mortals the Hozoji, the blessing way, the path to live in beauty and harmony. I grew up in a small hogan nestled amidst the crimson canyons and vast, bruised purple skies of the Navajo Nation. My childhood was a tapestry woven with the scent of sage and pinyon smoke, the taste of fry bread and mutton stew, the sound of my grandfather's cheis, flute echoing through the silent mesas, and the sight of Shimasani's loom, where vibrant threads transformed into landscapes of the soul. It was from them, my grandparents, that I first learned the profound connection between our land, our spirit, and the objects our hands created. They taught me that a pot was not just clay, but the earth itself, a rug not just wool, but the stories of the changing woman, a mask not just wood and paint, but a conduit to the holy people. These are not mere things, Ayasha. Che would say, his eyes deep and knowing like the night sky. They are our relatives. They hold our memories, our prayers, our very essence. This understanding led me to become a museum curator, a path that felt less like a choice and more like a calling. I studied at a university far from home, surrounded by a culture that often felt alien and dismissive of my own. Yet, I persevered, driven by a fierce desire to protect and reclaim what was ours. My work at our small tribal museum was a constant dance between joy and sorrow. Joy, when I could share the beauty and wisdom of our heritage with our own youth, their eyes wide with a dawning understanding of who they were. Joy, when a family would bring in an old basket or piece of pottery, entrusting it to our care. But the sorrow was a constant, gnawing companion. The sorrow of seeing our most sacred artifacts, the vessels of our ancestors' spirits, the keys to our ceremonies, displayed coldly, clinically, in the glass coffins of distant, monolithic museums, often mislabeled, misunderstood, treated as exotic curiosities or primitive art rather than living entities imbued with generations of faith and history. The sorrow of knowing that for every piece on display, thousands, tens of thousands, of others had been stolen, plundered, trafficked like soulless commodities, languishing in the climate-controlled vaults of private collections, far from the warmth of ceremonial fires, far from the embrace of those who understood their true, ineffable worth. This is an injustice centuries in the making, a gaping, open wound that never ceases to bleed in the collective soul of my Indigenous brothers and sisters across Turtle Island. We were dispossessed of our lands, our languages systematically suppressed, our spiritual practices outlawed, and our most sacred material heritage looted with impunity. It was, and is, cultural genocide, death by 1,000 cuts. My life, already steeped in this bittersweet reality, took a sharp, irrevocable turn on a damp, gray April afternoon. The kind of afternoon where the sky weeps a slow, mournful drizzle, mirroring the ache in my own heart. I was scrolling through online auction sites, a somber, almost masochistic ritual I maintained with the faintest, most desperate flicker of hope. The hope of finding traces of our tribe's lost treasures, of stumbling upon a familiar pattern, a forgotten form. Most days, it was a fruitless, soul-wearying exercise, a reminder of how much had been taken. My eyes, weary from hours of scanning grainy images and euphemistic descriptions, almost skipped over a dimly lit, poorly catalogued listing. The title was bland, dismissive. Antique North American ceremonial mask, attributed to Southwestern tribe. Early 20th century. Such generic labels were common, often a deliberate tactic to obscure an item's true origin and significance, to make it easier to trade in the murky waters of the art market. But there was something in the thumbnail image, a familiar curvature in the carved lines of what looked like cedar wood, a particular shade of faded turquoise and deep vermilion pigment, almost hidden in the shadows, that made my heart stutter, then pound like a ceremonial drum. I clicked, my hand trembling slightly. The page loaded with agonizing slowness. I zoomed in on the photograph. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful intake of air. The world around me seemed to recede. It was it. Unmistakable. Even through the poor lighting and the years of separation, its spiritual aura reached out. A silent cry across time and distance. The spirit mask of Ye, one of our most sacred, most powerful artifacts. This wasn't just a mask. It was the mask, the one used by the lead chanter in the Nightway ceremony. The Ye, a vital 9-night healing and blessing ritual. A complex tapestry of song, dance, and prayer designed to restore balance and harmony to individuals and the community. It was said to have been carved by a renowned medicine man generations ago, imbued with the power of the Ye themselves, the holy people who are intermediaries between the Great Spirit and mortals. It had vanished from our community over 70 years ago, stolen from the ceremonial hogan under the cover of a moonless night, leaving an irreplaceable void, a tear in the spiritual fabric of our tribe. The elders, Shimasani and Chei among them, still spoke of its loss with profound, palpable sadness, their voices hushed, as if a beloved member of their own family had been violently abducted. Its absence was a constant reminder of our vulnerability, of the sacrilege committed against us. They said the ceremony since had felt incomplete, a song missing its most vital note. And now, here it was, resurfacing not in a respectful museum context, not through a gesture of reconciliation, but listed for auction by a private collector named Alistair Finch. The name hit me like a physical blow, sending a surge of cold fury through my veins. Alistair Finch. He wasn't just a wealthy collector with an eclectic taste. He was a predator, a cultural vampire, notorious in Indigenous circles for his modus operandi, swooping into struggling communities, often those hit by economic hardship or natural disasters, and using his immense wealth and legal leverage to acquire priceless cultural treasures for a pittance. He would then either secret them away in his private, Fort Knox-like vaults, treating them as mere trophies of conquest, or flip them at exclusive, high society auctions for profits that were nothing short of obscene. He was the polished, urbane embodiment of colonial entitlement, of the systemic inequality that allowed men like him to trample upon our heritage, our dignity, our very souls, all under the veneer of art appreciation and preservation. His collections were not testaments to culture, they were monuments to theft. The initial rage, hot and blinding, quickly gave way to a cold, sinking feeling of despair, a familiar weight that settled in the pit of my stomach. What chance did we, a small, underfunded tribal museum, and a community still grappling with the daily struggles of poverty and systemic neglect, have against someone like Alistair Finch? He had an army of sharp-suited, silver-tongued lawyers, extensive connections in the art world and beyond, and the kind of financial might that could silence dissent and crush any grassroots resistance. Official channels? We had trod that well-worn, fruitless path countless times with other stolen artifacts. Large museums, government agencies, even international bodies. They often responded with bureaucratic indifference, carefully worded platitudes, hollow promises of investigation, or, worse, a complicit, deafening silence. The law, as it stood, more often than not sided with the concept of good faith purchasers and property rights, even when those rights were demonstrably built upon a foundation of historical theft, violence, and profound injustice. The burden of proof was always on us, the dispossessed, to navigate a legal labyrinth designed to protect the powerful. My fingers, still shaking, dialed the number for the tribal council chairman. Then, I called Shimasani. Her gasp when I described the spirit mask was a sound I will never forget, a mixture of shock, pain, and a fragile, almost disbelieving hope. The news spread through our small community like wildfire in a dry canyon. The elders gathered. Their faces, etched with the wisdom of generations and the sorrow of countless losses, reflected my own turmoil. We must do something, Ayasha. Elder Mai, a respected medicine man, said, his voice, usually strong and resonant, now hoarse with emotion. That mask, it is not just wood and paint, it is a doorway. It needs to come home. The Ye are calling for it. That night, sleep was an impossibility. My small apartment, usually a sanctuary filled with books and the scent of cedar, felt like a cage. The image of the spirit mask, so vibrant with latent spiritual energy yet so heartbreakingly vulnerable in the sterile, soulless photograph on the auction website, was seared into my mind. I saw Alistair Finch's smug, self-satisfied face, a face I'd seen in glossy art magazine profiles that lauded his discerning eye and passion for preservation, while conveniently glossing over the predatory, unethical nature of his acquisitions. The sheer, unadulterated injustice of it all was a physical ache in my chest, a tightening in my throat, that made it difficult to breathe. We were not just fighting for a piece of carved wood and painted leather. We were fighting for our identity, for our ancestors' memory, for the right to define our own sacredness, to control our own narrative, to heal our own wounds. The auction was scheduled in 3 weeks. A ridiculously, insultingly short time frame. Legal battles, even if we could afford them, would take years, decades perhaps, and the outcome was far from certain. Appealing to Finch's conscience was a laughable notion. Men like him didn't possess one, or if they did, it was buried so deep under layers of avarice, entitlement, and arrogance that it was effectively non-existent. He would see our pleas as weakness, our claims as an annoyance to be swatted away. I paced my small living room, the floorboards creaking under my restless feet. Despair threatened to engulf me. It felt like David against Goliath, but Goliath had a state-of-the-art arsenal, and David had a story. A true story, yes. But what was truth against such entrenched power? Then, an idea began to form. A tiny, defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness. What if we didn't play by their rules, in their rigged arenas? What if we took the fight to a different battlefield, one where Finch's money and connections held less sway? Finch thrived in the opaque, exclusive shadows of the high-end art world, in private showrooms and invitation-only auctions where ethics were often a negotiable commodity, easily sacrificed at the altar of profit and prestige. What he couldn't control, what he likely despised and fundamentally misunderstood, was the raw, untamable power of public opinion, especially when amplified and galvanized by the borderless, democratic reach of the internet. The next morning, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep but my mind clear with a newfound, albeit precarious, resolve, I presented my plan to the tribal council and a gathering of concerned community members. It was audacious, unconventional, and undeniably fraught with risk. We would take our story to the world. We would not just ask, we would demand. We would tell of the spirit mask, its sacred meaning to us, the deep spiritual wound its theft had inflicted, and the predatory, unethical practices of Alistair Finch. We would shine a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on him and the shadowy world he inhabited. We would expose him. There were skeptical murmurs, worried glances exchanged. Some of the elders, while deeply desiring the mask's return, were wary of such a public confrontation. They had seen too many battles lost, too many promises broken. "He is a powerful man, Ayasha," one council member cautioned, his brow furrowed. "He will call us liars, troublemakers, savages trying to extort him. He will use his lawyers to silence us. He could ruin our tribe's reputation, what little positive image we have. Let him try, I said, my voice firmer than I felt, fueled by a desperate courage I didn't know I possessed. We have the truth on our side, and we have something he doesn't. A story of profound spiritual connection, of resilience in the face of generations of oppression, a story that will resonate with people's innate sense of justice and fairness. He sees an investment, a commodity, a beautiful object to be owned. We see a living part of our soul, a relative crying out to come home. With the council's hesitant, anxious blessing, and the more enthusiastic support of the younger generation who understood the digital world, I threw myself into this new battle. My small apartment transformed. The usual scent of cedar and books overlaid with the metallic tang of old computers, and the nervous energy of too much coffee and too little sleep. My cousins, nieces, and nephews, a vibrant, tech-savvy crew, became my collaborators. Friends from university, Indigenous activists I knew from online forums, even a few sympathetic non-native allies offered their skills. We worked day and night, fueled by fry bread and a shared sense of righteous anger. My days became a blur of seeking. I pored over brittle historical records, old photographs, anthropological notes, some, ironically, penned by researchers who had profited from studying us. More importantly, I sat with our elders, a recorder capturing their voices, sometimes strong, sometimes trembling, as they recounted memories of the mask, its power in ceremonies, the stories their parents and grandparents told of its creation. Their testimonies, raw and emotional, held a power no academic paper could match. Each evening, I plunged into the digital abyss, tracing Finch's predatory shadow across the internet, unearthing documented instances of his unethical dealings, finding articles and forum posts from other Indigenous communities who had fallen prey to his tactics. We were building a case, not for a court of law, but for the far more influential court of global public conscience. The words we needed came, sometimes in a torrent, sometimes painstakingly drawn forth. How to translate our soul-deep connection to the mask into a language the outside world might understand. We wove Shimasani's tearful plea, captured on a shaky phone video as she spoke in Diné about what the mask meant, with the haunting call of a cedar flute and images of our sacred landscapes, archival photos of our ancestors, the joyful faces of our children, then the jarring, sterile image of the spirit mask, isolated and imprisoned on the auction site. We wrote not in dry, anthropological terms, but in the language of the heart, of spiritual connection, of cultural survival, of Hozo. We contrasted its incalculable sacred value with the obscene multi-million-dollar estimate Finch hoped to get, highlighting the grotesque commodification of our spiritual heritage. Our call was simple, a demand that echoed the deepest longing of our people. Return the spirit mask. We hope this message, this plea for honor, for Indigenous rights, for a reclaiming of what was stolen, would cut through the noise. A direct arrow aimed at the heart of the art world's indifference and at Finch himself. The morning we set our stories loose upon the digital winds, my breath hitched with a mixture of terror and fierce hope. With trembling fingers, we sent our carefully crafted pleas, our videos, our elders' words, out into the vast, unseen network, hoping to catch the attention of anyone who would listen. News organizations, museum ethics watchdogs, prominent Indigenous figures, artists, celebrities known for their activism, even influential art critics and collectors who might be swayed by ethical arguments or fear of bad publicity. We sent out a press release. We reached out through every connection we had, asking everyone we knew and everyone they knew to share, to amplify our voice until it became a roar that could not be ignored. The first 24 hours were a blur of anxiety and adrenaline. A trickle of interest, a few shares, some supportive but cautious comments. I refreshed my screens obsessively, my stomach churning. I feared it would fizzle out, another desperate cry lost in the cacophony of the internet. But then, something shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. A prominent Indigenous actor, one with millions of followers, shared our main video with a personal, impassioned plea. Then a well-known historian specializing in Native American art and repatriation issues wrote a scathing piece about Finch's practices, citing our struggle. Suddenly, the trickle became a stream, then a river, then an unstoppable, raging flood. Our simple plea, "Return the spirit mask," began to echo. It appeared on screens far beyond our small community, shared by strangers moved by our story. The phrase itself became a banner, a rallying cry picked up across regions, then across the country, then, incredibly, in places I'd only read about. People were genuinely outraged. Comments poured in by the thousands, expressing disgust at Finch's actions and profound solidarity with our cause. "This isn't collecting, this is cultural vandalism," one person declared. Their post shared countless times. How can one man's insatiable greed be allowed to outweigh an entire nation's spiritual heritage and human rights? Another posted, alongside a photo of themselves holding a sign supporting us. Images appeared, ridiculing Finch, depicting him as a cartoon villain, a modern-day pirate looting cultural treasures. Digital artists from around the world created powerful, moving pictures supporting our campaign, illustrations of the mask weeping, or of hands reaching out to bring it home. The mainstream media, initially slow to pick up the story, started calling, first local news affiliates, then national outlets, then even international news agencies. I found myself giving interviews, my voice shaking at first, my English feeling clumsy and inadequate to express the depth of our pain and resolve. But with each retelling of our story, my voice grew stronger, my conviction more solid. I spoke of the generations of historical trauma, of the systemic looting of our cultures, of the ongoing struggle for self-determination, and of this one, desperate chance to reclaim a vital piece of ourselves, to begin to heal. Alistair Finch, initially, maintained a contemptuous silence, likely believing this digital noise would quickly die down. Then, as the pressure mounted and his name became increasingly toxic online, his well-oiled PR machine lurched into action. A carefully worded statement was released through a high-powered crisis management firm. It called our claims unfounded, malicious, and defamatory, asserting Finch's legal and ethical acquisition of the mask through reputable channels. He painted himself as a dedicated preserver of global art, a benevolent custodian saving these objects from neglect and obscurity. He even had the audacity to suggest that we, the Navajo Nation, lacked the resources and expertise to properly care for such a valuable artifact. It backfired spectacularly. His condescending tone, his arrogant dismissal of our profound spiritual connection as sentimental folklore or primitive superstition, only fueled the public's righteous anger. Independent researchers, museum professionals, and repatriation advocates began to publicly scrutinize and question the provenance of other items in Finch's extensive collection. Other indigenous groups, from Australia to Africa to South America, emboldened by our campaign, came forward with their own harrowing stories of his predatory tactics, creating a global chorus of condemnation. The narrative was no longer just about our spirit mask. It was about a clear, undeniable pattern of exploitation, a lifetime spent profiting from the pain and dispossession of others. The pressure on the auction house, a prestigious, centuries-old institution that prided itself on its impeccable reputation and discretion, became immense. They were bombarded with tens of thousands of emails and calls. Activist groups, including members of our community and allies, organized protests outside their gleaming headquarters in New York and London. Their voices rose in unison, chanting for the mask's return, demanding an end to the theft of our heritage. The words echoing in the staid, wealthy streets. Major museums, which had previously done business with Finch or accepted donations from him, began to issue statements distancing themselves, expressing concern over the allegations. The art world, often an insular and self-congratulatory bubble, was being forced to confront the uncomfortable, often deliberately ignored, ethics of its own market, its complicity in the circulation of looted cultural property. Finch, I heard through back channels and sympathetic whispers from within the art world, was apoplectic. He was a man accustomed to control, to deference, to getting his own way. He threatened lawsuits against us, against media outlets, against anyone who dared to tarnish his good name, but the tide of public opinion was too strong, too widespread. He was becoming a pariah, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the unregulated, often amoral, art market. The man who craved admiration and respect for his collection was now globally infamous for his avarice and unethical behavior. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling. The definitive turning point, the nail in the coffin of Finch's arrogance, came when a former employee of his, a young researcher who had grown increasingly disillusioned with his practices, was emboldened by our campaign and the global outcry. She anonymously leaked a cache of documents to a highly respected investigative journalist. These documents, including internal memos, acquisition notes, and deeply questionable provenance records for several items in Finch's collection, including, crucially, the spirit mask, hinted strongly at its illicit origins, its passage through a series of shadowy dealers known for handling stolen goods. The journalist published a meticulously researched, explosive exposé. The story went from a social media phenomenon to a full-blown international scandal. A week before the scheduled auction, the auction house, facing a PR nightmare and potential legal ramifications, buckled. They released a terse statement announcing they were postponing the sale of the Native American ceremonial mask, pending a thorough review of its provenance and the concerns raised. It was a significant victory, a moment of breathless relief, but we knew it wasn't over. Postponed was not returned. Finch could still try to sell it privately, spirit it away to another country with laxer laws, or simply wait for the storm to die down and try again later. We refused to let up. We intensified our efforts, shifting the focus from stopping the sale to demanding its unconditional return. We organized online vigils, shared more stories from our elders about the mask's importance in healing ceremonies, and kept the pressure squarely on Finch and the auction house. We highlighted the moral imperative, the chance for a genuine act of reconciliation. Then, the call came. It was from a lawyer, a different one this time, smoother, more conciliatory, representing Alistair Finch directly. He wanted to open a dialogue, to discuss a mutually agreeable resolution. My heart hammered against my ribs. I gathered our tribal chairman, our own pro bono legal counsel, a passionate Diné woman who had offered her services, and several elders to be part of the ensuing discussions. The negotiations were tense, protracted, and emotionally draining. Finch's lawyers initially tried to frame any return as a magnanimous goodwill gesture on his part, a generous donation for which he expected public acknowledgement and perhaps even a tax benefit. We flatly refused those terms. This was not about his generosity. It was about rectifying a profound wrong. We demanded an acknowledgement, however implicit, of the wrongful possession and the harm caused. We demanded its unconditional, unencumbered return to the Navajo nation, its rightful stewards. There were moments when it seemed the talks would collapse, when Finch's legendary arrogance flared up through his legal team. But we held firm, armed with the weight of global public opinion and the undeniable moral high ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he caved. Perhaps the relentless negative publicity was irrevocably damaging his other businesses and his social standing. Perhaps his family, embarrassed by the scandal, had pressured him. Or perhaps, just perhaps, In the deepest, most hidden recess of his soul, a tiny sliver of shame, or at least a pragmatic understanding of his untenable position, had managed to pierce his thick armor of arrogance. Whatever the ultimate reason, he agreed. The spirit mask would come home. The day the spirit mask was physically returned to our community is a day etched forever, not just in my memory, but in the collective memory of our people. It wasn't a grand public ceremony for the media, but a private, sacred, deeply emotional moment. A small delegation from our tribe, including myself and several elders, traveled to a neutral location to receive it. When the crate was opened, and the mask was finally revealed, a hush fell over the room. It was even more beautiful, more powerful, than any photograph could convey. The elders wept openly, unashamedly, as they reached out with trembling hands to touch the familiar, sacred carvings, the faded pigments that still pulsed with an ancient energy. They sang the old songs, the welcoming songs, songs the mask had not heard from its own people for over 70 long, lonely years. It was as if a lost, beloved member of the family, long mourned, had finally, miraculously, come home. The air in the ceremonial hogan where it was first taken that evening felt different, charged with a renewed spiritual energy, a sense of wholeness, of Hozo restored. As for Alistair Finch, his humiliation was profound, multifaceted, and very public. His carefully cultivated reputation as a discerning connoisseur of art was in tatters, replaced by the indelible image of a cultural predator. Several major museums launched internal investigations into objects they had acquired from him or through dealers associated with him. Some pieces were quietly deaccessioned. His name became a cautionary tale in the art world, synonymous with unethical collecting and colonial arrogance. The man who had built his entire identity on possessing rare and beautiful things was now irrevocably defined by the one sacred object he was forced to return, by the collective voice of a people he had underestimated and disdained. There was a certain undeniable, karmic poetry to it, a bitter but deeply satisfying kind of justice. Was it revenge? Perhaps, in a way, there was an element of that. There was a deep, undeniable satisfaction, a righteous vindication, in seeing him brought low, his power diminished, his arrogance shattered, by the very people he had sought to exploit and silence. But it was so much more than mere revenge. It was reclamation of our heritage, of our dignity, of our right to tell our own stories and protect our own sacred ways. It was a victory for our ancestors, who had endured so much, and for our children, who would now grow up knowing that their heritage was precious and worth fighting for. It was a testament to our resilience, our enduring spiritual strength. The fight, of course, is far from over. Countless other sacred artifacts, from countless other indigenous nations, remain stolen, scattered across the globe in private collections and museum vaults. The struggle for cultural repatriation, for true decolonization, is a long and arduous one. But the return of the spirit mask of Ye Biche taught us something vital, something transformative. It taught us that our voices, when united and amplified, can indeed shake the foundations of power. It taught us that even in a world rife with inequality and injustice, justice, sometimes, with unwavering resolve and strategic action, can prevail. The little one, Ayasha, along with her people, had faced a Goliath armed with immense wealth and privilege, and, armed with truth, community, and the digital slingshot of many voices united, had made him fall. And that, I believe, is a story worth telling, a story that whispers of hope even in the darkest of times, a story that reminds us that no injustice is too entrenched to be challenged, no treasure too lost to be reclaimed. The mask is home, but our collective memory of injustice, and our unyielding resolve to fight it, now burns brighter and fiercer than ever.